Hey there, everybody. Parks Owsley here with Jatt, joining from across Los Angeles in a Zoom meeting, the future of interviews. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Really quick, to start things off, you want to just go ahead and make a playoff prediction? And then you can just make like 6 different ones and I can just, cut it out.
That's the trust. I mean, everyone coming to the playoffs expects C9 to smash, but I'm obviously not sure of it because I've been casting all of the LCS for the most part. And 2016 Immortals, we kind of thought the same thing and they got 3 out in the semifinals. So round 1 up against 100 Thieves, like you have to wait to see what happens. But I think there's at least like over 50% chance C9 wins the split. Yeah,
I would agree, but it would be fun. I'd love to see him take some games. At least make it competitive. It'll be a fun playoffs. But moving right past that, I want to talk some about your style of casting, how you kind of differentiate yourself. You've had a really long career, and then after that, the thing that really does differentiate you in a lot of ways is your focus around stats. So we'll get more into that kind of in a little bit. First, to follow up on something you talked to one of my coworkers about in October, you're talking about when you're getting back into casting and you had to shake off the rust and stuff. And there were some specific things you wanted to focus on this year. So I just wanted to see, do you feel like this spring you have grown in ways that you were hoping to? How do you feel like you did this year?
I think so. I mean, it's obviously been a really weird year because we played the first 7 weeks and then we switched to remote casting. But there was definitely something that I was able to add to my casting towards the end of last year, which was maybe just a little bit more levity. I think for most of my casting career, I was very serious, very technical, and that's the type of casting that I use to try and be a additive experience to the game. I never really had the goal of going into a cast and say, I want to make sure people thought Jatt had a great cast. No, I would go into the game and think, I want to make this game as enjoyable as possible in any way that I can. And I think coming back after not doing it for 8 months, I think there's just like a little bit of joy that came into it. And I wanted to make sure that I kept that heading into this year. And one of the things that happened this split that I actually think ended up helping my casting is so occasionally I cast some Academy games this split actually. And the first few Academy games I did, I really struggled internally with my tone. I didn't know how I should, cast these Academy games because either you're saying, man, let's be super serious about their potential move into the LCS, when realistically a short handful of guys is going to move up to LCS this split. So for the most part, these guys are still a long ways away from their eventual goal. So just touching in on that journey is like really hard to do during a game. But you also don't want to meme on the league because these guys are actually still all trying to make very serious cases to be professional league players. So ultimately I'm like, okay, the people that are watching Academy, either they're fans of orgs or they just want to watch 5v5 League of Legends fun. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to cast it like a fun, well-played 5v5 League of Legends game. I'm not going to worry about these like grandiose statements, but like if a big play happens, I'm going to get excited. And if a bad play happens, I'm just going to laugh about it. I'm not going to meme on the players, but I'm just going to have fun. And I think I transferred that went so well. I cast a set of 3 games with Pacer Time that felt really good that I tried to transfer that a little bit more towards LCS where sure, when the moment is right, like when we have the C9 versus TL game, we can get really big into the serious story and how much it means. But for the most part, each of these teams is playing 18 regular season games. A lot of them, while eventually they will have meaning, are not actually that meaningful in the moment. Like just have fun. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm able to do that now because I have so many years of practicing my technical casting that I don't have to think about it as much. And then when I focus on adding in a little bit of fun, it ends up working pretty well.
Yeah. Well, so I personally would say that I feel like you have grown this year. And I think part of it is myself as well. Like, I can pay more attention to certain things, maybe. I don't know.
Right.
I think specifically, though, about you, what I've noticed this year more than any other year is your style matches the play-by-play no matter who they are. And I think you've shown a lot of variety this year that I didn't see before, and I don't necessarily see in everybody else. Was that an intentional thing? Do you just feel like because you know everyone so well, maybe you just mesh well with everyone because you know them as people as well? Like, am I just maybe reading too much into it? I don't know.
I'm not sure. It's good if it comes across that I'm able to cast with a lot of different people, because I think this is one of the hardest skills to learn as a caster, is active listening, because there's so much you have to pay attention to during a league game to then have an insightful thing to say about what just happened on screen. So you can get so completely locked into the game that, like, actually while the play-by-play is talking, that's my time to pay attention to the game. And then, they stopped talking. Okay, here's what I was thinking about for the past 20 seconds, right? And that's a pattern that I used to get into a lot. And I think just because I have cast for so many years, I have gotten better at listening to what they're saying, so that then while I'm doing this other stuff, I'm still able to hear the tone that they had, the cadence that they had, the topics they're bringing up, and weave that into whatever I'm going to say. So that is something that is taken many, many years of practice. You can even play a game like we actually only did this for a couple months, but we've probably told the story for years. Kobe and I, way back in 2013, when we were both like first time LCS casters. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, you were back to back. Yeah.
Okay, apparently you've heard this story before.
Yeah, I think
we've told it so many times. We actually only did this a few times.
That's so funny.
Because we didn't actually necessarily think that it helped that much, but it was an example of kind of what you need to do while you're casting. It's sit back to back, tell a story, but have both people tell a story. And then you stop after 45 seconds and you try to tell each other what the other person said. Like, because essentially that's what you're trying to do when you're casting, is you're speaking all the time while still trying to pay attention to the story of the game and pay attention to what the other guy is saying. So it just takes a lot of practice. I
used to, when I was younger, I wanted to be able to like write song lyrics while singing a different song and listening to a different song. I never really got it down, but it seems kind of like that. No, it's pretty tough. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, that's a cool drill. I like that. You should try it again though. See how much better. Yeah, actually, we probably should. Now that we've told the story enough times, and when we can sit back to back again, we'll try it. Honestly, you should do it for content. Yeah, actually, that would be fun. I think it would be really fun. Yeah. I would watch that. So do you feel, touching again on, when you first came back and we talked to you, it was mostly about your return. Do you feel now that you've been back longer, all the rust is gone, you've grown even more, do you feel like you know more about the game after having been a dev? Are you looking at it differently this spring compared to a couple years ago? I think I'm looking at the game differently, but I think that's something that changes like actually every year. Just thinking back to the way I cast in 2015, I'd be like, man, I can't believe I did that. And it's like, and then another day I'll listen to a 2015 cast and say, ooh, I should do more of what I did back then. So when I initially came back, I think it definitely changed my casting in the short term, because so Spawn said something that I'm going to repeat here, but I want to give him credit for it. He's like, interesting people help to make interesting casters. So what ends up happening a lot of the time in casting is you just kind of subconsciously pull from whatever you've been thinking about or whatever you've been doing lately. So since I'd been doing game design lately, I could pull all of these relevant game design examples out of the back of my head during a game and be like, oh yeah, this is a conversation I had with this designer. And like, because I'm not talking with them as much anymore, I have less of those stories to pull from. But instead I'll pull from, the 20 solo queue games I played in the previous week. And occasionally, like, yes, I will pull from the 8 months I spent in game design if the topic is right, but it just gives you all these different angles to go through. And that only gets enhanced depending
on how many League of Legends experiences you have. It's one of the reasons that pro sports commentators so often are previous pro sport athletes or coaches, because they have the most interesting stories that people care about, right? So being on game design helps make me more interesting in the same way that being a coach for a year or two would help make me more interesting, or the fact that I was a professional player with Dignitas helps with those stories. So yeah, short answer is yes, it definitely helped. It's just because the longer I'm removed from it, the more I'm just going to naturally pull from the recent stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I don't know if I've heard that point before, like even about the sportscasters. Yeah, of course they're,
every sportscaster, like Tony Romo, I think just signed the biggest like sportscaster deal in history. If you've seen the news about that.
No.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh goodness.
He got it, like all these NFL networks got into this giant bidding war about Tony Romo, but it's because his casting was so good. And it's not because he was the best quarterback ever. He was a really good elite quarterback on a really popular team, but he speaks so well. He can be self-deprecating, and he really brings you into the football game in like a technical way. And he has just oozes charisma, right? But like Tony Romo is interesting, right? If that was me, not that I could, but like imagine I just did a bunch of football research and say like I watched tape for 2 years somehow and could give good analysis. Like if it's not Tony Romo saying it, like people aren't going to care as much in that way. So it's an interesting thing to think about when moving into like sportscasting.
See, well, I grew up in Houston, so Tony Romo casting actually is kind of a turnoff for me. Oh, yeah, that Dallas team. But that's funny. Actually, I had not heard that he was moving into that. So, really quick, and then we're going to get on to some stat stuff. But since we're talking about development still, if you could make one balance change right now, just pop over to your old team and say, hey, guys, please make this change. What would it be?
Yeah. Well, one sec. Let me check the win rates on Lolalytics.
Okay.
My current balance change. Well, here's the thing is I kind of was built into trying to make these changes that are overall like good for the game, not just selfishly, like the things that I like to do. Selfishly, I would just nerf Shaco because I don't like playing against him.
I permaban him. He's so annoying.
My ban.
Yes.
He's my ban, but I want to be able to ban Katarina instead. But I'd rather ban Shaco.
Yep.
So, and these are not like good. These are not good designer talks. It's like, wait, I just can nerf. Like, there's a million different ways you can nerf champions. But I would definitely try and nerf Shaco. I would like it if he was less assassin
himself
and included more sustained type of fights. So like Wukong is overtuned right now, but something that I really like about him is how you can feel slippery in these extended fights and do all these interesting things to land like larger CC zones. But basically his one-shot potential was removed. So if something somewhat similar could be done to Shaco, whatever you want to call him, I would appreciate that because I think he's just so bursty right now, and that's really frustrating to me.
Yeah,
that's it, though.
I agree. No, I would, if I was on the dev team, I would do that as well.
Yeah. Easier said than done, by the way. It's very easy to say like, oh yeah, just make Shaco less bursty and make him feel good. It's like, what? I don't think that's possible. So.
See, actually, I don't want him to feel good. I want him to feel bad and no one to ever play him again.
Unfortunately, you can't do that.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people that like him.
That's fair. So I don't know if there's actually anything on this topic, and this is slightly different. I'm curious about a potential caster ceiling as far as career, because over the years, obviously, a bunch of people have been casters, and now a portion of them have moved to different positions, and you were one of them, but then you came back. So I feel like you have a really interesting perspective. Do you feel like there's any sort of caster ceiling, or do you think there's no problem at all, or maybe a soft one, or any thoughts on that?
I don't think there's a problem within casting, but I do think that it is not unique to League, that people will broadcast and then they'll try something else and then they may or may not go back to broadcast. NBA commentators, I think, are actually prime examples of this. I'm going to say some names. I'm not sure if you follow the NBA, but like
very loosely.
Okay, so Steve Kerr. Mm-hmm. He's currently the coach of the Golden State Warriors. However, he was a professional NBA player for the Chicago Bulls and the San Antonio Spurs. He was a commentator for TNT for 10 years. Then he became a general manager of the Phoenix Suns, and then he became the coach of the Golden State Warriors. And then like there's another commentator, Mark Jackson, who does a lot of ESPN and ABC games. He was a professional player. Then he was a commentator. Then he actually coached the Golden State Warriors before Steve Kerr. And then when Steve Kerr replaced him, he went back to commentating. So there is naturally in these pro sports ecosystems a lot of flow between playing, coaching, GM, casting, because people that are really good at thinking about the game oftentimes have skill sets that can be utilized elsewhere. So that was, in a sense, with game design, I thought some of my skill set could be utilized in this new way that was really exciting to me. And then after I did it, I realized that I didn't give casting enough credit for what it was doing for me and how much I enjoyed it. So I wanted to go back, and thankfully I was able to. Like, the team allowed me to come back, which was great. And that's kind of how I feel. So like, I can't necessarily speak for other casters, but it's definitely not something that is unique to League. I think future in League, you may see this continue. I think one of the things that has happened with League so far is like the pro players at first, like me and Kobe, who jumped into casting really, really early. We did it maybe without even knowing that the League scene was going to boom as big as it did. Because I think there's a lot of pro players that could actually make great casters, but sorry about the noise outside. There's like a garbage truck going by. I don't know if you hear it.
Oh, good, yeah.
There are so many players that I think could make great talent on the analyst desk or on casting, but like at the current moment, they would rather be playing. So if they end up getting a chronic wrist issue or something, then maybe they'll consider another way that their skill sets could be utilized. So right now, I think in terms of like personal fulfillment, as well as how I can utilize my skill set, casting is the best spot. So that's kind of that's the conclusion I came to after spending 8 months away.
Well, there you go. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks.
So moving slightly more into more specific Jatt stuff, because there are a number of color casters, but there's only one Jatt. You are the stats guy. You started up your JLXP this year, which has been really interesting. I specifically really liked the one you did with Tim. And so I actually had a bunch of questions I wanted to ask about that. I'm going to ask one here, but most of it doesn't really apply too much. But how has, I know one of the things you mentioned to us earlier was you wanted to do more content, more unique content. I'm guessing this is one of them. So how has it been shifting from The Dive, which was a podcast with other people that you were kind of hosting, to doing a solo podcast / having one guest on, and it's kind of your show? How has that changed your week, the way you kind of look at content, the way you interact with League as a whole?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think The Dive is great. I love that show. It's still performing really well with Mark. What I think we wanted to do was let's try and make more stuff, because ESPN doesn't just have one show about the NBA or the NFL. They have a plethora of shows. Mm-hmm. So it was trying to just make something a little bit different. And like, let's see if people care about this. So one thing that doing it has affected me is I definitely have to do a little bit more prep work, in the sense that I am the one driving all the conversation. Whereas when you're on a 3-man podcast like The Dive, a lot of times you actually can just show up. Oh yeah, I have these 2 things that I think are interesting. And then Azale and Kobe will both have 2 things they think are interesting. And then we'll have an hour-long conversation. And that's great. But this one is more prep in that sense. And because the number of people is lower, not that we could never do a 3-person episode, but because we've decided to do podcast only to make it like easier. You don't have to get a studio lit up. You don't have to do makeup. You can just, it's much easier to port online, right? Mm-hmm. It's just easier to get guests. And I also think easier to make people feel comfortable when they're not on camera and worrying about how they're sitting and how they're looking and stuff.
Yeah.
But it also gives me a lot more time to give my full opinion on something, because like actually it is just my show, and if people are interested in that, that's really cool, because then that can ladder up into so many different things and topics that don't necessarily have to fit into whatever the brand of another show has become. And you know, still messing around with it. We've literally only been doing JLXP for 3.5 months at this point. I think we've done 27 episodes of it so far. So like we've been pumping it out. And I think the bigger thing is I'm just getting a lot of reps in doing this type of content, which I think will be very useful later. Currently, it's not about, for me at least, it's not about driving a huge amount of eyeballs to this thing, because like the production costs and the overhead is really low for this show, but it's about making myself a better storyteller, finding new ways to bring in new voices and new guests, right? We were able to get Tyler, an observer, a big C9 fan. We got Elias on at the start of the year. We had Tim. I will probably have plenty more unique people on throughout. So it's just a nice, hopefully like low pressure platform to talk about some more of the more fringe stories. So it's just been, a bit of an experiment.
Cool. Yeah, it's been fun. I haven't watched all 27, or listened to.
Yeah, don't expect you to. But, that's the other thing. It's like click on stuff that's interesting. Like if I think about the way that I consume podcasts, I'll just like scroll through the list of the shows that I previously listened to and like look at the titles and the descriptions. And if it's a topic I'm interested in, I'll click on it. But I'm not listening to every 2.5 hour Bill Simmons podcast. I'll look at the ones that I'm interested in.
Yeah. Well, and apparently working from home has actually cut down on the podcast listened to, because people aren't driving to work anymore, which is a bummer. But
yeah. I don't know. I haven't done a deep dive into like overall viewership, but I wonder if it's going to bounce back a little bit more, because just imagine all the things everyone has to take care of. Just the number of different circumstances people are under right now with the crazy environment that we're in. So not worried about short-term viewership. There's plenty of other things to concern yourself with right now.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at growth as well. Yeah. For like just personal growth rather than numbers growth.
Yep.
So kind of going into some of the topics you were talking about there, some more stats stuff. Right off the bat, how do you overcome outliers? Because that's something you touched on when you were talking with Tim a couple of weeks ago. But I don't know if you moved on to a different point or there just wasn't. I don't remember what happened, but
yeah,
like fasting Senna, how do you overcome that, or the funnel?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge that our own personal stats team does a lot of good work to do. So Chloe and Tom this year have actually, it's not a 100% perfect solution, but they just tag the game differently. So when accounting for CS stats, if Sven plays no CS Senna, he just gets tagged as support. So his CSD isn't going to be nuked because he played one game of Senna. Likewise, when Vulcan has 150 CS on top bench, he doesn't just nuke the CSD stat as well because he's just tagged as a bot carry that game. So in terms of tagging, the stats team has done a really good job this year of doing that to try and account for some of those outliers. Funnel, the game design team consistently, chips away at that. I think they change. I think there's like 20 minutes now, the Monster Hunter penalty kicks in and you only gain like 40% experience and gold from minions when you're in Monster Hunter penalty. So it's like trying to make sure the game stays somewhat structured to help avoid those outliers, because I mean, when they first come in on the scene, you just kind of note it whenever you're making that case. And there's even the smaller outliers, like when Yuumi is really OP or something. Oh yeah, they played against Yuumi, so they lost lane because they just got poked to death or something. That was last year. Yuumi's not really strong in lane this year, but you're always just trying to apply as much context. And if something looks off, that's when you check the details, and you only can tell if something is off kind of by intuition, you'll see, wait a minute, should Sven be down 20 CS at 10? And then you'll check and it's like, oh, this game needs to be tagged differently, or this game was this in this really weird scenario. And you just use another stat if you're trying to tell an accurate story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what about like crazy level 1 stuff? You know, like a team gets a triple kill and the bot lane, the enemy bot laner is 2-0-1.
Yeah.
They come to lane with extra items.
Those things happen. And over the course of a season, they will generally not make that big of a difference. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about, if I'm trying to present a stat in week 3 and I know that this top laner got invaded, died, teleport back, got dove again, and just like the game was not in his favor, I'm not going to go in on a cast and be like, he's down 40 CS at 15 on average, he's got to pick it up. No, I can just say, oh yeah, he had a really rough game. He was down 40 CS because he got dove. And then you can still use the stat in an accurate way rather than twisting it.
Yeah, that's fair. So something you mentioned when you talked to us as well was balancing between regions is really hard when like Lucian top is only played in one region and like this other, everybody else is playing different stuff. Mm-hmm. How do you compare stats then across regions? Because the LPL and LEC specifically play very different than the LCS and the LCK, mm-hmm. but we're still looking at the same stats, mm-hmm. like, oh, the damage share percentage or whatever, right. Even game time, total damage, because game time is different, but they're also fighting more. And how do you compare all of those and actually make them relevant to each other in the same discussion?
Yeah, it's just always trying to apply your own understanding of the game to the stats to make sure that they still stand up. So one thing that is very useful in that is trying to compare even different players within their own region to know what the difference is. So let's just say, hypothetically, that this region team fights more, so their DPMs are higher, right? So Uzi's 700 DPM is going to be way higher than Teddy's 400, right? You could say, wow, he does 300 more DPM. He's so much better. But what I would probably do is I would compare, like I'd cross compare a few stats. So I'd see, okay, Uzi's DPM is 700 per minute. The combined kills per minute of their games is this, right? Like let's say it's 1 combined kills per minute, whereas Teddy is playing in games with a combined kills per minute of 0.5. So he'd be playing in games with half as many kills. And then I'd think, well, actually, that still means Teddy is doing pretty well. And then I decide not to use that stat, right? Mm. But if I saw that their DPMs were 700 and 400, but Teddy was in games that had just as many kills, I think, hey, wait a minute, Teddy's actually not doing that much damage. And then I'd be able to deliver that stat. So I always have to try and find that thing that can cross-reference whether it's there. So if one player is doing way more of a certain stat than everyone else in their region, and you can kind of try and control for some of these other variables, then you can actually dig into the meat of it. Otherwise, it's just noise.
And do you feel like roles themselves also have different most relevant stats, I guess, per region? Like, are there things that junglers only do in like one region that it makes sense to actually look at a stat, but not another region?
Yeah, I looked into this a little bit earlier in the year and never really found a great way to deliver it, and it might have changed by now, but just trying to evaluate different junglers throughout different regions. Basically, what I found was LCK junglers farm much more than LEC or LCS junglers. Their CS per minute, or no, I think it was CS at 15 minutes is the stat I tried to check. It was like 12 more on average. But their jungle proximities, which is the time they spend within like 1,500 units of someone else, that stat. I'm just making sure for
the viewers.
Was much lower. And it's like, well, that just makes sense, right? If they're farming more, they're ganking less. But it's like a lens to look at that region with, and then you can start to think, well, you will get really interesting results if one person is spam ganking and one person isn't, but just like it then just leads you to ask more questions. So is the reason that LCK junglers are farming so much, is it because if they gank, it's going to have a lower chance of working? So they're just farming as the next likely thing? Or are they just bad for not ganking? Right? Because, well, LCK laners generally play more passive. LEC laners play probably the most aggressive of the three regions we just talked about. So naturally, if they're doing the right play, they should actually be ganking the most. Whereas if LCK Korea is playing passively, well then if you gank and it doesn't work and the other guy's already farming a lot, he's going to counter jungle you. And actually that becomes a really negative value play. Whereas in the LEC, the counter jungle is less likely to happen because that guy's probably just doing another game. So there weren't any like really punchy conclusions, but it was more about just making sure that the stats made sense to understand the ways the different regions play and then trying to find stats that kind of back that up.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's league stats are strange in so many ways. I think the same can be said about a lot of other pro sports stats, especially the way stats has evolved, like trying to follow a little bit of NBA stats. Like shooting percentage used to be a big thing. But shooting percentage is so influenced by volume and shot quality, which previously could never be recorded. But in the last decade, they've learned ways of evaluating those things. So they understand if a player is able to make hard shots, if they only make easy shots, if they're able to make a lot of good shots per game and stuff like that. So I don't know if League is going to ever go through that type of evolution, but at least me personally, I always try and add my own context to it.
I think I think we will at least move there. There were even just some ideas that you had in that JLXP about ways we can make jungle proximity specifically slightly better, like make it count more if they're really close or less if they're farther.
That was Tim's idea. It sounded pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, that was. But yeah, so I think eventually, we'll at least have slightly better information.
Yeah, and I also want to say, I talked to Tim because I specifically wanted to talk about his early game rating and some of his other stats he has on Oracle's Elixir, like GSPD and GPR. But that's not to say that Chloe and Tom in NA or Ika and Connie in EU are not awesome stats people who give us so many good bits of information and databases that I wouldn't otherwise be able to get elsewhere. So shout outs to all the stats people.
To all the stats people.
Yeah.
So how do we make stat spots better? Because I don't know what it ended at this year, but I know for a while it was negative. Yeah. And so, was it literally just crazy this year that everyone was always upsetting?
I think so, yeah. Because the middle of the pack was actually the whole league.
Yeah, so, it was like 8 teams.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care if StatSpot does well or not. I love StatSpot for prediction games because it gives us a control.
That's right. Yeah.
So it tells you if you lose to StatSpot, it means you're not adding anything extra in your analysis to predictions. But if StatSpot goes 15-40, stuff's pretty wild. And that's not what it did. But if it were to have gone something like that, then you think, well, wow, actually, Mark predicting 40% was impressive because nothing went to expectations. So yeah, I don't care if it makes StatSpot better. I like what it's doing because it's doing maybe they've updated it, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I remember the original StatSpot that Ika made over for the ULCS or LEC, whatever it was at the time, was basically it was very strict. It's just, whoever has been better in the last 9 games, and then maybe side select as a tiebreaker or something, and it just predicts that team. And a lot of times that'll beat most predictors. So
that's so funny.
Stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, that is pretty simple. Yeah, I wonder if we'll get we'll have the StatSpot for control and then StatSpot 2.0 that's looking into all sorts of these variables. Because eventually I guess that's what like betting sites and stuff do, where they're diving into a bunch of different stats. So they must have, some sort of prediction of some sort. So, I just think it's so funny when StatsBot is negative, because before it had been pretty spot on.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much it. I wanted to ask, though, going back to playoffs, one other thing you mentioned was CLG, and if they had Pobelter, that at least when you did that a couple weeks ago, you said, well, they would probably make playoffs, or have really good chances. I'm wondering what your thought is now after their finish.
Yeah, my thought is no.
Okay.
Because let me see if I can actually get it now. I believe cumulatively, Pobelter, while he did look better in certain moments, come on, give me old Pobelter. He was. Did I get him? Shoot, he was 2-9, 2-7,
2-7 or
2-8. He was 2-8 in the 10 games.
Oh, okay.
The 2 wins were certainly hard carries, but 2-8 in 10 games. 2 of them against Cloud9. So let's just say if he's the rest of the league, he's still 2-6. That's not playoff caliber. His play basically declined right after I said be a playoff team with him, because I got that question on the JLXP
it was the fate
inbox episode. But yeah, he said he's made some tweets about it. Something is like off with his health. He's been sick for like 2 or 3 weeks, and he feels like he's just like feeding on stage. And I'll give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because he came in really odd circumstances, and maybe if he had been practicing mid lane all off season instead of having jungle and then come in and like work on his champion pool, they'll be better. So I think like if you're GMing CLG, you're probably thinking that Pobelter is still worth running it back with, but they would not have made playoffs with the 10 games of Pobelter we saw, even if that was stretched to 18. That's my updated opinion.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to update that, if there was one. Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else you want to talk about, either yourself, your stats, or playoffs before we go?
Who do you think is the second best team? Because EG is obviously the second seed, and they looked the hottest lately. But like, will they be in the finals against Cloud9? Because that's going to be what tells us who the second best team is.
Well, I have to pull up the format then again.
Oh, geez. Okay, that's a struggle. EG plays Fly. Winner of that game plays winner of 900. But then after losing that, you dump down to the final lower bracket. Yeah.
And then they could play them again, essentially.
Yeah. You could theoretically play the same matchup twice.
I feel like EG probably is the second best team right now, but I don't feel good saying that. I think throughout the entire season, it was really hard to get a grasp on who was good and who wasn't. I think actually it was just everyone was bad.
Maybe.
I think I was actually only watching LPL last summer. And so, watching this year's spring was like kind of rough. But I don't know. I think I predicted EG would be 3rd or 4th or something coming into the season. Okay. So I feel kind of validated. Actually,
I feel pretty good about that. If
I put TL at 1st or 2nd, I'm only off on average like 1 place. Like everyone basically just like shifted.
Yeah.
So, if I throw that outlier out, I was actually pretty spot on.
Yeah. Everyone missed TL 9th somehow.
Yeah. But I don't know. Everything feels awkward. TSM, I wanted to be second best. And then they had a terrible last weekend. So I think I might still put them. I think TSM at their best in the season, I think is the second best team. Yeah. But I don't trust that it's going to show up. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. And it's just playoffs are going to be fast because of the week we missed. Basically, it was going to be this 4-week thing, and now it's basically compressed to 3. So we got the Saturday, Sunday games. And then we have Tuesday, Wednesday games for lower bracket. And then we're on to semifinal finals. But it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. And who do you think, though?
Oh, I'll need to actually down the stretch. Right now, EG's got a pretty darn good shot. and I probably go. I keep getting a few 100 Thieves fans tweeting at me being like, you haven't give 100 Thieves credit all year. And every year there's this one team that I don't feel like has it, but they keep winning. And then like every time it happens, people are like, have you changed your opinion yet? Not really. So like, I still don't want to say 100 Thieves is even third best. Cloud9 agrees with me, luckily.
Yeah.
Fly Quest instead. But yeah, I think it's probably like if you power rank playoff teams, it's like C9, EG,
TSM, maybe.
They're literally only one game different than second place.
Yeah.
So, but it's a mess. Anything could jump over anyone else in these things. So your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, it'll be exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you again so much for joining. Thank you all for watching as well. For more Inven Global content, please like and subscribe below, and we'll catch you next time.